Today, it is an academic session. You are all students of law. I am given to understand that you are interested in know the role of India in the evolution of internationalism or international law. I had gone through your syllabus where the first chapter is concept of social change and transformation. And then I referred to one of your referred author, Nagendra Singh, Justice Nagendra Singh, who had written an article on India's role in the evolution of international law. I am not a person with an expertise on law. Does not mean that I am an expert in history. I am involved in explaining history for the past over half a century at the collegiate level. Our endeavor is to find out truth from the past that has some relevance to the present. As a teacher of history, I honestly feel that historical analysis should not be preluded by sense of pride. If we proceed with a sense of pride, our view could become a colored view. A honest opinion demands that in knowing the truth with the help of facts, one should not have prejudice or bias. When I went through the writings of the learned Justice Nagendra Singh, especially his article on History of Law of Nations, Regional Developments, South and Southeast Asia, I felt a little upset because the whole thing, entire writing was based on pride without an inclination to know the truth from the available resources. Hence, I intend to dwell on the specific topic as an historian, not as a person of legal profession, as an historian. Here, evolution of the transformation of society. Transformation should be preceded by formation. That is the basis. From formation, you progress towards transformation. Transformation implies change. There were several conditions which prompted changes. The conditions could be internal or external. There are very many factors that compel us to have a review of the existing system or condition and to strive for a change or a transformation. The whole thing which I view as a problem is that there is a tendency to treat India as a single unit, physically a single unit, culturally a single unit. And then they try to make a chronological unit. Ancient India, the author himself says that the Vedic age commences in 4000 BC and his period of analysis in the ancient India reaches up to 700 BC, 700 AD. 4,700 years are to be covered under this category. It is written as if India was a homogeneous social unit, homogeneous political unit, homogeneous cultural unit. It is far from the truth. Every knowledgeable and honest historian agree that India is a country of plurality, multiplicity, heterogeneity. India, as Romila Thapar recently pointed out, it cannot be history of India, it should be histories of India. It cannot be society of India, but societies of India. It cannot be culture of India, it should be cultures of India. And it cannot be a language of India, it must be languages of India. So this basic factor is not taken into account while Nagendra Singh, the learned scholar, had written on the ancient Indian history. India itself is a world consisting of several nationalities, several languages, several cultures from time immemorial. And I am very much confused to see that in the write-up of Nagendra Singh, that Vedic age commences in 4000 BC and concludes in 1000 BC. A 3000 years period is given to Vedic age. I am remembered of what K.A. Neelakantha Shastri, the much acknowledged historian on South India, once stated, which appeared in a recent edition from the Hindu, where they collected the letters of Neelakantha Shastri to the Daily Hindu. In that he stated, Neelakantha Shastri observed that he now narrates an incident when he attended a function of celebrities. He was confronted by scholars or eminent people who had much pride in Indians or Hindu past. They questioned Neelakantha Shastri, you are a well-known historian, but you had stated in your books that the Vedic age commences by about 1500 BC. Why not you use your authority as a historian to put the date back by 3000, 4000 or 10,000 years BC? Why can't you do it? And Neelakantha Shastri's reply is given in that letter. Of course, I could have done it. The only constraint is that I do not have the courage to defy the fact. History is meant to be stated on the basis of facts and not on the basis of our wishes or our fancies or our pride. Every known historian so far acknowledged that Vedas commenced by about 1500 BC or even later, 1400 BC. You could have come across a book on Vedic India published by Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, which was edited by the famous scholar R.C. Majumdar. And in that, contributions were made by mostly Sanskrit scholars. Apte, Pusalkar and such scholars had contributed on the Vedic India. Even in that work, famous work, most of the contributors had pride in Sanskrit, had pride in Vedas, had pride in Hindu past. Such scholars, while writing history, had stated rationally that the Vedic age commenced by about 1500 BC. This was based on certain facts which they listed there in the book. Why now then this Nagendra Singh, Justice Nagendra Singh, a learned judge, who is an accomplished judge at the international level, should put that 4000 BC as the beginning of the Vedic age? Is it a distortion of history or a subversion of history? I feel it involves both. It is not only distortion, it is subversion of history. Because in the pre-1500 BC, there was a non-Vedic culture in India, in northwestern part of India. Non-Aryan, non-Vedic culture, which has been established by the archaeological discoveries made in the second decade of the third decade of the 19th century. Sir John Marshall, who directed that exploration and excavation and who contributed articles based on rational approach, came to the conclusion that there existed an urban civilization in northwestern part of India, in the Indus region, which was non-Aryan and pre-Aryan. Though some scholars today, driven by their Hindu chauvinism, claim that there was no pre-Vedic India in Indian history, the fact remains that there was a pre-Vedic India. And the Vedic literature belonged to the pre-literate period or pre-script period, when there was no script for the writers. Everything was uttered and memorized and was transferred from generation to generation orally. There was no written document. Hence, I suggest my students to distinguish the pre-script age resources, information, from the script age information, literate age information. So, where you will have to make a distinction, there is a distinction between pre-literate age and post-literate age. Vedas belong to pre-literate age. By literate I meant the age when script was used to record everything. The Vedic age had no script. The Smritis belonged to the literate age, script age. Everything was written. There were Smritis and not Shrutis. The Vedic literature is known as Shrutis, unwritten, retained through memories, transferred from generation to generation orally. This must be borne in mind. Another thing is that when you go through the Rig Veda, the earliest of the Vedic literature, there are 10 mandalas, and even Max Muller agreed that the first and 10th mandala was a later addition or interpolation. The middle 8 could be taken as the earliest ones. That Rig Vedic literature, when you go through the list of the contributors, the rishis, you will find that the Rig Vedic age covers at the best some 4 to 5 consecutive generations, not more than that. That is around 200 to 300 years. You can extend it to 500 years if you want. But the Rig Vedic age did not last long. It was confined to, at the best, 500 years. Then it was followed by later Vedic culture. And that later Vedic culture, from 1000 AD to 1000 BC to 600 BC, 400 years, this period is covered by the later Vedic literature. At any rate, the Vedic age, which includes the Rigvedic age and later Vedic age, cannot be stretched beyond 1000 years. This is one fact. Second thing, while you examine history, we accept one particular thing, one particular concept, that history is a record of our travel or progress from imperfection to perfection. The earliest condition was imperfect and it had to undergo changes, and the attempt was to secure a better condition. So, this continuous efforts from imperfection to perfection that makes history. But the pride in the effort, the pride historians try to portray history where we had a perfect past, an imperfect medieval period, and we try to reperfect them by going back, by what you call retrieving what we are lost in between. This goes against the rational approach in history. History is based on scientific analysis of facts. Humanity did not commence as a civilized society. Humanity commenced as something like the animal stage. We began with as an animal group of animals. From animal stage to human stage, we had to travel a long, and where our rational approach and our desire for better conditions worked together, and we brought about changes. So there was no Krita Yuga, there was no Satya Yuga, there was no golden age in the remote past. We are progressing towards a better condition. That fact should be borne in mind while analyzing the facts concerning history. And the learned scholar says that we had a perfect condition in the past. So, on these things, I want to inform you that the facts say otherwise. First of all, the relation between formation of society and formation of polity, that relationship must be understood. Social formation precedes political formation. This cannot be contested. Social formation precedes political formation. This law applies to India too. India is no exemption. In Indian history, there are a number of societies, a number of linguistic groups, ethnic groups, which contributed for the cultural developments or civilizational developments. Vedic is one of the groups and not the only group that contributed to Indian history. Generally speaking, we can make three elements that contributed much to civilization development in India. The first thing which is made as a homogeneous one by Nagendra Singh is that the Vedic tradition. The Vedic tradition is also known as Vaidihic tradition. Anything which is based on Veda, which acknowledges Veda, is Vaidihic. Vaidiha tradition. Second thing, within the Aryan framework, Aryan is a larger society, ethnic group. Aryans are not confined to India alone. Aryans are there in other countries. Germans claim themselves to be Aryans. The English claim themselves to be Aryans. So there were a number of nationalities in Europe as well as in Central Asia, Middle East. They claim themselves to be of Aryan origin. So Aryanism is not synonymous with Indianism. Aryans, Arya, by Arya we mean a ethnical group which were moving from place to place in the past. Now we found them in many countries as the dominant groups. Most of the European nations are Aryan nations. And Hitler took pride in being an Aryan, and he wanted to make his country, Nazi Germany, as a perfect Aryan state. He did not want any non-Aryan to pollute that Aryan's culture. So Aryanism is not confined to India. In India, Aryanism cannot be synonymous with Vedic culture. Vedic tradition is one of the Aryan streams in India. In fact, we can make a distinction. There are two streams of thought and culture in ancient Aryan history. One is Brahminical thought, another is Shramanical thought. Within the Aryan framework, there were larger groups which opposed to the Brahminical claims and Brahminical supremacy and Brahminical monopoly. And this group, the Aryans who opposed to the Brahminical supremacy, Brahminical leadership, Brahminical divinity, these groups are identified as Sramanas in the ancient Indian literature. Sramanas. Why there is no reference to Shramanic culture, Shramanic thoughts and Shramanic ethos in the article which refers to ancient Indian political thought and judicial systems? And this you must understand. So within Aryan framework, there were Brahminical thoughts and there were Shramanical thoughts. And beyond this Aryan, we find the non-Aryan system, non-Aryan traditions. And that non-Aryan tradition, of the non-Aryan traditions, the most dominant is the Dravidian tradition. And of the Dravidian tradition, even the most significant one, which survives even today, is the Tamil tradition. So there were Brahminical tradition, there were Shramanical tradition, there were Dravidian traditions. The interplay between these three brought about transformation in the Indian societies and polities. By ignoring the other two, you cannot present a fact which will give you the truth. Fact is an evidence which would lead to realization of truth. If some facts are concealed, if some facts are ignored, bypassed, and with select facts, if you want to know the whole truth, then you will be searching for a black cat in a dark room which is not there. So this is the first thing I want my students to understand. History cannot be based on our romanticism, our pride, our searching for a golden age in the past. History is an instrument to know the truth so that we can strive for further perfection in our cultural life.
உன் கடவுளை விட, உன் சாஸ்திரத்தை விட, உன் முன்னோரை விட, உன் வெங்காயம் வழக்கமாத்தை விட உன் அறிவு பெருசு, அதை சிந்தி.